The aim of our project was to evaluate the effectiveness of a Touch New Zealand community sport programme. Touch is a very big participation sport in New Zealand, incredibly popular amongst the Pacifica culture. So the question we tried to answer is, from the stakeholders' perspective, can it be used to bring together a community? The background to this was that with the combination of the New Zealand Police and targeted groups across New Zealand, they came together to see if there was any way in which the key organisations or stakeholders could work together on a joint project which would have mutual benefits in terms of establishing shared goals while achieving organisational and strategic objectives to the benefit of the targeted communities. The project involved interviewing 8 stakeholders from these Touch New Zealand projects and then interviewing them and then using a thematic analysis to understand the perceived effectiveness of the programme. The key objective was to determine whether the Touch New Zealand plan of creating successful community hubs or entities to provide social change and opportunities did actually occur from the perspective of the stakeholders. The approach that was used was the interview and thematic analysis. We had 8 stakeholders agree to take part in the study. The 8 stakeholders, 4 were male, 4 were female. We recorded the interviews, we then transcribed them and used Braun and Clark's 2006 methodology for the thematic analysis. The outcomes of these interviews with the stakeholders were 3 distinct themes. The first was including the excluded, the second was social networks, and the third was social change. This first theme is presented here because it seemed to be the most influential reason for stakeholder participation. One of the most prominent factors was the belief that financial barriers prevented many from taking part, as the cost of enrolling, usually for organised sport, can be prohibitive to this. In addition to this, there was the financial burden of travelling to sports venues, and the need to purchase sports equipment was significant deterrents for the usual sports participation. But all of these deterrents were sorted by Touch New Zealand, so therefore there was a greater uptake in terms of local community. Demarcations between social groups in the community were also seen as a barrier to participation, and there was a desire from the stakeholders to break through these barriers and create a space that was inclusive for everyone. The perception was that usually many of those involved in negative behaviours or criminal acts were not included in the wider community from an equal perspective. The stakeholders identified the social focus of the event to be very important. They paid particular attention to the event format that required each team to have a child under 12 years and an adult over 40 years. This was suggested to provide inclusion to those that are typically overlooked in competitive sport environments, and something unique in the sport opportunity currently available in New Zealand. The second theme was social networks. The stakeholders suggested that the new community connections being made at the events were an indication of the project's success. The development of a positive connection in a different context between the police and previously disenfranchised community members was considered particularly rewarding. The stakeholders acknowledged the need for support while organising and delivering the events. They were very grateful to Touch New Zealand for the extensive support that they provided throughout the community projects. Part of the theme of social networks is the access to funding it potentially provides. The topic of funding was widely discussed by the stakeholders, and the issue of securing ongoing funding was clearly perceived to be one of the biggest threats to the sustainability of the project. The final theme of social change. This theme emerged from the stakeholders' responses that suggested the projects being delivered were affecting positive social change within their communities. Because the events are successful in bringing people together, they present an opportunity to demonstrate and share common values that are considered positive by the stakeholders. These are commonly referred to as family values by the respondents, and they appear united in their shared beliefs. So in summary, the experiences and insights shared by the stakeholders participating in this research suggested the projects have effectively provided positive social benefits to the targeted communities, and that building social capital is a vital part of the success. The stakeholders suggested that the projects have led to improved feelings of trust and reciprocity between community members and institutions such as the police and the local marae. They also perceived the projects empowered community members by improving quality and quantity of their social connections, With some development, social capital shows potential for use in the future monitoring and evaluation of these ongoing projects. The stakeholders involved in organising and delivering these events believed their participation was purposeful, and they intrinsically understood that through building social capital they could provide a pathway for the betterment of their community. All indications from this research support this perspective,